Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining our webinar, Ask a JIRA Expert. We're recording this session, or we'll be submitting a link to the recording over the next few days. Our next webinar, SDLC Project Management with the Atlassian Toolset, is scheduled for January 7th at 11 a.m. Central. This webinar will provide a comprehensive look into the Atlassian Toolset as an SDLC project management tool. As you have questions, feel free to type them into the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll go ahead and queue them up and answer them in the order they're received. This webinar is a little bit different from what we normally do, so we did receive quite a few questions in advance, so we'll be answering those first, and then go ahead and move on to the ones asked in real time. So on the webinar today from Principio Consulting, we have Christopher Pepe. Chris is a partner here at Principio Consulting and is one of our many Atlassian experts. He'll be presenting today's webinar. My name is Shayla Sander. I'm a business development manager here at Principio Consulting, and I'll be serving as your moderator. So we've been Atlassian expert partners for over 6 years now and are one of 5 platinum enterprise experts in the country. Over 99% of our projects are Atlassian related, and we have hundreds of clients across the US, ranging in size from 20-person companies all the way to Fortune 20 enterprises spanning many different industries. We help our clients with process-centric technology solutions that facilitate traditional business process management, IT service management based on ITIL, and software development life cycles. In the SDLC space, we're helping clients transition from traditional waterfall to agile. So whatever widgets you produce, we can help improve the quality and throughput at the lowest cost. We support our clients in all facets of the Atlassian product suite and build methodologies and solutions across the entire line of products. This includes solutions architecting and implementations, licensing, upgrades and maintenance, managed services and hosting, add-on development, and of course, training. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Chris to lead us through the webinar.
So as Shayla said, I'm Chris Pepe. I'm one of the partners, and I've been working with JIRA for quite a long time. I was going to have my camera on today so that you could actually see me and we could have a little bit more kind of interaction than we normally do, but I'm having trouble with my computer. So you'll just have to take it on faith that I am wearing my Atlassian tracksuit, which is a one-of-a-kind piece of Atlassian swag. So the format for today is going to be, go ahead and use the question box. Try to use the question box as opposed to the chat box, just so we have one thing to focus on. But ask your questions in the question box, and we'll be going through those and answering as many as we can over the course of the time that we have today. We got a lot of them were emailed in, as Shayla said, so we've already done a little bit of legwork ahead of time to get answers in place and a little bit of in-app demoing in place. So we'll go through all of those. And then, of course, it wouldn't be much of a Ask the Expert webinar if we weren't answering your questions live. If you have questions after the webinar, or if we don't get to your question, we're going to do our best to try to email answers out afterwards or get you a response in some way. But if you have more in-depth questions, always feel free to contact us. We'd love to talk to people, whether you're an existing customer or just a potential future one. So let's go ahead and jump into your questions. Shayla's going to read off the questions, and then I'm going to start answering them. So go ahead and start typing your questions in now as well.
Okay, great. So our first question comes from Ken. The question is, we have yet to find a way to enter our estimates in a manner that gives us a valid burndown chart on agile projects and would like advice. So the process they're currently doing is issues are entered into JIRA via a backlog with a high-level estimate. When they get into a sprint, they're creating subtasks that reallocate the hours in the original task. So for example, if a story is entered with 40 hours, the dev team determines that they'll need 6 hours of work, 2 hours of development task, 8 hours of QA, etc. So presently, they're seeing the subtask show as additive in the scenario above, and it ends up looking like there are a total of 72 hours rather than 40. How would you recommend that they solve this?
Okay, I was hoping I was going to jump right to my issue. So the problem that you're seeing there is that the way that JIRA handles time tracking is that when you put in your original estimate in your parent ticket and then you create subtasks and you put in time estimates for those, all of that time is getting rolled up. I was going to walk through it. Maybe we don't actually really need to. That's really the core of the problem there, is that the time is getting double entered. So one thing you could do is take that original 40-hour estimate and delete it out of the parent ticket. It's not really getting at what you're trying to do there, I think, because you're trying to have the 40 hours was the estimate, and then, well, I still think if you deleted that out, it's going to cause problems with your burndown charts just because of the way that that Jira Agile calculates those things. Back when Agile was called Greenhopper, it had a little bit better support for time tracking for burndown charts, but it still has always been a little bit of a headache. And the fact that subtasks roll up their time into the parent task is really where the problem is here. One of the things you could try doing is either just not putting time estimates in the original story or re-architecting the way that you're thinking about how you're doing your estimating. So if you took your stories and instead made those epics and then created all of your tasks, bugs, and other issues, test cases, and things like that underneath those epics and gave all of those time estimates, then at least you wouldn't have that duplication and you'd have the ability to still have that kind of hierarchy where you have a tracking entity and then all the things that are related to it underneath it. Another thing to consider is that generally in the Agile world, we don't really use hourly estimates anymore just because we've seen time and time again that humans are just particularly bad at estimating time. We're not very good at saying it's going to take me this many hours to do a thing. What we are really good at is comparing this thing is bigger, this thing is smaller when you put two things next to each other. So a lot of the Agile estimation is really moved towards take all of your stories and then put them all next to each other and compare which ones are bigger and which ones are smaller and use a more abstract idea like story points to determine how big they are. As you get better at estimating those things, your sprint teams or whatever your iteration is, whatever your development cycle is, you'll be able to work through so many of those issues, and eventually you'll establish a cadence or a velocity in Agile terms where you can say, over the given, over a 2-week sprint, we can tell 20 story points. If once you get to that sort of stability, then you're able to say this new feature that you want implemented, it's going to take 4 sprints based on the number of points we've estimated it to be. So it's going to take 8 weeks for us to actually implement that and have a reasonable level of assurance that in 8 weeks you'll actually have that thing done. So I think it's a combination of potentially rethinking not using time as the metric that you're using to estimate how big things are, and then maybe looking at your JIRA data model a little bit and moving things around so you don't get that duplication of time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. So the next question is from Sonal. Can we delete statuses from already published workflows?
So historically, you were not able to delete statuses from a published workflow. And I believe that's still the case. So the way that you need to do that is you need to copy your workflow so that now it's not associated with any workflow schemes or any projects. Then you can go and modify in any way you want, including deleting statuses and deleting transitions. Then take that workflow and map it back into your workflow scheme. So in doing that, you're still effectively being able to delete that status. And now the way that JIRA works, it's much easier to manipulate workflow schemes. Back in the old days, we had to copy the workflow scheme and copy the workflows to make the changes we wanted and then apply that new workflow scheme back to the project. But now we can just copy the workflow, make the changes, and then swap it out in the workflow scheme.
Great. So another question from Sonal. We're creating different issue types for different entities, user stories, tasks, tests, bugs, etc. Does having these many different issue types create complication? Is it convenient to keep track of these issues? So for example, user story might have 3 tasks, 2 tests, and 4 bugs. Isn't that creating a linking issue or traceability issues?
So I spent a little bit of time thinking about this one. This is actually a really big question. The question itself is very directed and very straightforward, but the idea that it's getting at is a really, really big question. And it's really the whole reason that Precipio exists as a company. So, we're very process-centric, and we spend a lot of time thinking about processes, and really to effectively model your company and your business's processes in JIRA and have effective workflows and effective traceability and connectivity across all of your systems. That's really what our clients hire us to help them figure out the best ways of implementing that. So it can be a huge challenge. Really what it comes down to is thinking about how you can create that efficient data model that accurately maps what your processes are, what all of your metrics are, how you want to report off of those things, so that you're getting meaningful data out of your system and it's actually helping you do your work. Um, you've already started going down the right path in that you're thinking about it before you're acting, and that planning before you change things in JIRA is really the most important piece to getting a good, efficient data model and a good, efficient implementation. For your specific question, I mean, again, it's one of those things we'd have to talk a lot more in depth about exactly how you're doing things to figure out what the optimal solution for your organization really would be. But just from the question itself and just from our experience, this is another case where I think if you reorganize the way that you're looking at your issues, you can get some additional functionality without having to do any additional work. So again, JIRA Agile, I think, is going to be the answer here. And if you take your stories and instead make those epics, and then take your 3 tasks, your 2 tests, your 4 bugs, all the things that are associated to that work that you're doing, and make those issues within the epic, you have a really easy way to do that within JIRA Agile, so that it's easy to create the issues. Those links are automatically created for you. It's still easy to encapsulate. All this work that we're doing has these tests and bugs and tasks that are associated with it. That really simplifies the issue linking. It keeps the reportability and the traceability at that high level that you want it to be, and it doesn't really add any extra work for you. I can show you really quickly what that looks like by going to a Scrum board. So here, if I go to the planning board, we've already got a number of different epics that are already created here. And I can just go and click on Create Issue in Epic, and that'll allow me to create a new issue and automatically link it back to this epic. Or I can take an existing issue and just drag it up into an epic if I already have it, and that'll link it back to that epic. So it makes it very easy for me to create those issue links, and still gives me this JIRA issue that lets me be the kind of overall bucket that I'm putting all of the actual tasks that we're doing into.
For a quick way to see an issue's priority when looking at it on a board besides filtering it.
Sure, so there's a couple different ways that you can see an issue's priority, and actually a lot of the different bits of information about an issue. Here we'll look at the planning board, but the exact same thing is available on the work board as well. The priority is actually this little icon right here. It's the second one in from the left. You notice that if I hover over it, a little tooltip pops up that tells me that this issue is a medium priority. So even if I don't recognize the icon itself, I can hover over it and it'll tell me that this is a priority and that priority is medium. Similarly, this is the issue type right here. And then finally, you notice that there's this little color. We've got orange, a light green, here's a darker green. You have the ability in your board configuration to map that card color to any attribute that you want. So if you wanted to peg the priority to that card color, you could do it. Here we're doing issue type, but again, you can really take any of those fields or any of those data points associated to an issue and make that be the thing that the card color reflects. So you have a couple of different ways to be able to easily get that information from an Agile board. And then just for completeness, like I said on the work board, that same information is there. Here's if I hover over it, it'll tell me that this is a medium issue, and again, there's the issue type, and I've got that same card color right here.
And so one more question from Sonal. Is there a way to automatically move an issue to a different workflow when the issue type changes, like with a post function?
Sure. So in order to change the workflow that an issue is using, you don't actually have to do anything beyond configure the project to work the way that you want it to do. Let's take an example where we have user stories and bugs in the same project. User stories go through some development workflow, and then bugs have some additional steps that we do for additional QA or reproducing the bug itself. Whatever it is, we have 2 different workflows associated with each of those issue types. So as a JIRA admin, I would create a bug workflow, and I would create a story workflow. Then I'd create a workflow scheme, and in that I would map the bug issue type and maybe defect issue type as well if we use that to my bug workflow. And I'd map issue stories and tasks to my story workflow. And then associate that workflow scheme back to the project. So if I created a bug, it would go through the bug workflow. If I created a story, it would go through the story workflow. So then finally, if I have an existing issue that's a story that really should be a bug, if I just edit that issue and change the issue type, or if I use the move operation to change the issue type, Jira is going to automatically know my issue type has changed, this other issue type has a different workflow, and it will switch that issue to use your other workflow. So going from a story to a bug, it would go from the story workflow to a bug workflow. Now, if our workflows have different required fields, if they have different statuses in the workflow, then Jira will force me to go through a mapping process and say, this story was in the open state. What state would you like to move it to in the bug workflow? And maybe new is the state that we're using in bug. So it'll make me map all of the data in the story issue type to the bug issue type. So just to kind of circle back for completeness, you don't need to use a post function or anything like that. You actually just need to, as a user, change the issue type from one to another. Jira will automatically know that it's supposed to use a different workflow, so long as you have that project configured to use different workflows for different issue types.
Okay, so next question is from Cindy. What options for pass-through authentication exist? Are add-ons the most often method used? And are there other ways of doing this without paying a hefty price?
So this is another one of those kind of complicated questions where there's a lot of it depends in them. The biggest it depends is where are you trying to get your authentication information from. If it's something like you want a user to log into their Windows workstation and then automatically be logged into all their Atlassian applications, that's a much more difficult problem, and that's a very different problem than I want them to log into Jira and then automatically be logged into all of their other applications, Confluence and Fisheye and maybe some other web application that we have. That's a much easier problem to solve. So in the case of SAML or any of the other kind of standard authentication mechanisms that are out there outside of the web kind of realm, add-ons are really the only approach that you have, either using an existing add-on, and there are quite a few that are available in the marketplace. So either using one of those existing add-ons, finding a third-party product like Okta that has integration with some of the Atlassian tools, and being able to use that somehow, or writing your own or engaging an expert to write your own for whatever your particular system is. Now, all of the applications have REST-based authentication mechanisms in them. And crowd is usually the one that people are looking for when they're talking about this kind of problem, because it's usually single sign-on is one of the challenges that you're trying to solve. So if the place that your authentication tokens exist are somehow browser-based or HTTP-based, then it's relatively simple, as long as you can intercept those credentials, to pass them off to crowd's authentication mechanism via REST, get that token back, and then store that token in the browser so it's available for all the other applications that you're going to be using. That's not it's not without its own challenges, and it's not without a good bit of technical knowledge to actually be able to implement something like that. But actually, if you look out on Bitbucket, there's a couple of examples of JavaScript-based crowd authentication. So there are already some examples that are out there. There are a number of add-ons. There is no good, real simple way unless you're using standard mechanisms. If you want to plug into some sort of LDAP user directory, like Active Directory or Open Directory, then you're fine. You're not going to have any trouble at all. If you're really trying to solve that single sign-on piece and crowd isn't going to solve it for you, then you really need to start looking at add-ons.
Okay, so next question. Besides custom fields, what other system configuration items can cause poor system performance? Permission schemes, notification schemes, and if so, what are some best practices for these?
Yeah, that's a great one. The short answer is lots of schema. That's really what it's going to come down to. So you already mentioned custom fields, lots of custom stuff. So lots of custom fields. Usually notification and permission schemes don't really get in the way too much. There's a couple of tricks that you can play to minimize the amount of permission checking that Jira and Confluence and other apps have to do. But for the most part, the permission schemes and the number of permission schemes you're going to have aren't really going to be where the overhead's going to come in. It's going to come in from lots of custom fields, lots of custom workflows, complicated workflows, lots of field configurations, which have required fields and hidden fields, lots of other types of schema. And then other bottlenecks are really just the number of concurrent users that you have, the number of issues that you have in the system. So If you have 500,000 issues, a million issues, that's going to require a lot more resources, and that's going to cause a lot more heartache than a new small system that has 10,000, 100,000 issues in it. So those are some of the things that you want to look for. Really, the best thing that you can do is have lots of levels of monitoring. So you can monitor all the different parts of the system to look for where the bottlenecks are, rather than just try to guess, well, we have a lot of custom fields, let's have less custom fields, and maybe that will make things better. So you really want to know what's going on in the JVM, and that's one of the things we almost never see people monitoring. So tools like New Relic will allow you to monitor what the JVM is doing. There's also JConsole and a bunch of other things, free tools that are available to you. But something like New Relic has monitoring built into it, alerting built into it, and it really simplifies the act of monitoring the JVM and having historical data to be able to look at and drill down into and actually look at stack traces and things like that. So beyond what the JVM itself is doing, you want to monitor all the different network interfaces that you have. You want to look at things like whether your disk access speed is too slow. That's something that you probably wouldn't really think to test necessarily, but it has a huge impact on how your system's going to operate. So if you have your JIRA indexes on a NFS share on a relatively slow network, that's going to have huge latencies in the amount of time that it takes JIRA to access its index. And it uses its index constantly for everything, literally everything. Like every one of these menus, my recent projects, all this stuff about issues. When you go look at an issue, all the details that are being displayed, all this stuff is coming out of JIRA's index. It tries as much as possible to not go directly into the database. Makes it much, much faster to do that. But if the index lives on a really slow disk, or a disk that's slow to access because of the multiple layers of technology that are used to mount that disk on your JIRA server, then that's going to have huge impact in your performance. And then even just things like the thread pool isn't big enough, so that when people go to do things, they run out of either HTTP threads, or the database doesn't have enough connections in order for JIRA to be able to get the information it needs. There's really a lot of complex moving parts these days, especially in the kind of enterprise version of these applications, where you really have a database layer, an application layer, and then either some sort of proxy or load balancer layer. There's a lot of different caches, and there's a lot of different moving parts. And monitoring every single one of those to look for the bottleneck is really the way to get the most performance out of the system.
Okay, so next question. When entering a custom field, what is the best practice for configuring the field for specific issue types and projects versus a global context? We have custom fields that will only be used for one or two issue types in a subset of projects, but we've configured them all as issue types for all projects. Is there a downside to this configuration?
So I don't know that there is a downside to this configuration. The ability to have these really complex contexts for your different or for your different custom fields is a really, really old feature in JIRA. It's been there pretty much forever. And it means that you can do something like have one screen that has 10,000 fields on it, but when I go and create a new issue, only the 10 that are relevant to my project and issue type actually show up. So that's cool because you can have a lot fewer screens, but it's very, very confusing as an administrator. So I always encourage new admins especially, but even seasoned admins, just to use the global context and have more screens. Really, unless you're going to have hundreds of screens, it's really not going to impact performance or anything like that. And it's much, much easier to have a My Project bug screen and a My Project story screen, as opposed to have one screen, just the default screen that has every single field in your entire JIRA instance on it, and then all these really complex contexts that determine whether or not it gets displayed. Where it really becomes a headache is we have this custom field that we use for bugs in project ABC, and we want to use it for defects in project XYZ. Figuring out how to get that field to show up on the screen is a relatively challenging thing, and a lot of people really struggle with that. So for that, I think it makes more sense to just use the global context and have more screens that are dedicated to your projects, as opposed to really, really complex schema. And that'll make your life as an admin much, much easier. You can do it both ways, and as an end user, you're not really going to see a difference. But as an admin, your life will be infinitely easier if you keep things simple. One thing I do think makes sense with context, though, is if you have a custom field, and for project ABC, it has, well, for one project, it has options 1, 2, 3, and for another project, it should have options 4, 5, 6. Then I think that creating additional contexts within the custom field is a really good use of it, as opposed to creating a second custom field for that other project to use. But in general, I think the custom field as a whole should have a global context.
Okay, great. So the next question is from Edson. How can I make an issue editable when the status is already closed? Also, I am unable to add a transition from a closed issue to another status. Perhaps you can show how I can do this as well.
Yep. So the second part of your question, you should be able to, in the workflow editor, create a transition from closed to anywhere else that you want. It is possible that JIRA is blocking that because closed issues are immutable or are not editable. But otherwise, you should be able to do that. The first part of your question is actually the first part of your question actually relates to the default workflow that comes with JIRA, and most likely what you did is you copied that in order to make your custom workflow. So here I've got the standard JIRA system workflow that comes with JIRA out of the box. If you go down to the closed status, and we look at the properties for this status, you'll see the answer to your question in there. It has a property called jira.issue.editable, and it's set to false. So when you copy this workflow and then you go and make changes to it somewhere else, this property gets copied along with it when you create it. So because of that, you are no longer able to edit a closed issue. If you created your own custom workflow that looked exactly like the JIRA workflow, when you did it, you wouldn't be creating this property, so your closed issues actually would be editable. So if you want to be able to edit closed issues, what you need to do is go into your custom workflow and either delete this property or create your own. It's actually generally recommended that you don't copy the JIRA workflow when you're creating your own custom workflows, because it has that property and a couple of other properties hidden in it. And at least historically, we'll see if it's still there, but there used to be a condition on starting and stopping progress. Yeah, looks like it's still there. So starting and stopping progress, you can only do it if you're the, now it's assignable users. It used to be that only the assignee was allowed to start and stop progress on the issue, but it has a couple of sneaky little things hidden in it that you don't necessarily know are there, especially as a newer JIRA admin. So directly answer your question, you can edit closed issues. You just have to make sure that you go into your workflow and delete that property out of it. If you're using the standard JIRA workflow, then you cannot edit closed issues, and you should either copy that workflow or create a new one and go delete all the special stuff out of it. You should be able to create transitions out of the closed status, so that might be something we need to take a closer look at, what the specific error that you're having is.
Okay, so we have another question from Sonal. Can we add more columns in the test issue type? So currently there's a test step, test data, and expected result. Can we include columns for module, test scenario, etc.?
Mm-hmm. So by columns here, I assume that you mean fields within the issue type itself. You either mean fields or statuses, and in both cases the answer is yes, we can do that. Let me jump to an issue so that we can take a look at one first. So if you want to be able to add additional custom fields, for example, health right here is a custom field that we added in, you should be able to do that. The steps you'd have to go through would be to create your new fields. So you'd have to go create a custom field called test step, create one called test data, create one called expected result. And then after doing that, you would go into the screen configuration for that project and for that issue type and add those custom fields into the screen. You might also need to modify a field configuration in order to make them required, or if they were hidden for some reason, to make sure that they were shown for your project. But that's really all there is going to be to it in order to get those extra fields to show up. If what you meant was statuses, then you'd have to go into your workflow editor and add those additional statuses. You might need to copy your workflow, add those additional statuses, and then map it back into your into your workflow scheme in order to get those extra statuses to show up. But I'm pretty sure you can just add statuses into a workflow without having to copy it. Excuse me. If we didn't answer your question there, please chat us a clarification to it, and we'll try to get back around to it if we get through all the other questions.
Okay, so next question. If we plan to get the add-on IT help desk, how easy or difficult would the transition be? What would happen to our existing issue types and workflows?
So I went and looked up, I think that this is the one you mean, the Help Desk for JIRA add-on, which is built by a group called Team Lead. And it adds in some additional, it simplifies the JIRA user interface in a way that makes it a little bit more friendly to help desks or service desks so that customers don't have to look at all of the complexities of JIRA itself. They can just enter in the specific bits of information that they want and get kind of more simplified views for more of a service desk implementation. In doing this, I would have to wonder if you've looked at JIRA Service Desk and why you wouldn't just use JIRA Service Desk instead. It has a lot of really nice features. I won't make you watch this video right now, but it implements SLAs, queues, has really good reporting into it. It's a very configurable, very nicely polished product for implementing a service desk, and is really meant to compete with, ServiceNow and Zendesk and all the other service desk products that are out there. And it works really well for organizations that already have a well-adopted Atlassian presence within the organization. And Service Desk lets you create beautiful portals which transform all the kind of complex technical details of what's in a JIRA issue, and allows you to ask much more natural questions and really lead your users through a process of kind of self-serving and then creating good, useful issues that allow your service desk operators to help them solve their problems more quickly. This help desk add-on looks like it's doing a similar thing. I'll admit I don't know it. I haven't used it before. It does look like a kind of simplified version of JIRA Service Desk. So to answer your question, though, how difficult would the transition be? Again, you're already talking about planning before you're doing, so that's good. Really what you want to do to smooth that transition, there's going to be some sort of a transition. Both what Help Desk looks like to me and JIRA Service Desk can be pretty seamless transitions, and generally they're making people's lives easier, so usually people are pretty happy to go through that transition. It's usually not very painful. We've done a number of service desk implementations and they go really well. All of that assumes, though, that you're doing a lot of planning and designing on the front end, that you actually have a beta system that you set up and that you're testing out. Ideally, you're getting early adopters to go in, try things out, test the assumptions that you've made, and really figure out what your design is going to be. As far as your workflows and your JIRA schema, you don't really have to change any of that stuff. You can use all the same custom fields and field configurations that you have. You can use all the same workflows, and within JIRA Service Desk at least, you can map all of those to be more simplified. So if you, for instance, only want to expose to your users that their work item is either open or resolved, then you can choose to only show them the open and resolved statuses, and all of the ones that are in between, it'll still just show them their issue is open or in progress or whatever you want it to say while you're going through all of your internal steps. So as long as you do all the planning and testing and forethought, it's really not going to be a difficult transition.
Okay, great. So the next question is from Larry. Where are good resources for information on effectively interfacing JIRA with PagerDuty?
I don't know. That's a good question. We're going to have to dig into that a little bit more. Both PagerDuty and JIRA have really robust REST APIs. So that alone makes it very easy for you to integrate the two things together. There's also a third-party product that you can bring in if you wanted to called Loggly. Loggly is basically a SaaS implementation of Splunk. It's got a bunch of other stuff, and I'm sure Loggly would be mad at me for saying that it was simply just that. But if you want to compare it to something that you may know, that's the easiest way to think about it. Loggly has a alert mechanism called Alert Birds. They may have actually packaged it up into a prettier, nicer branded thing by now. But that allowed you to tie directly into PagerDuty. And a couple of years ago, I'd written a little proof of concept when Jira first announced their REST API that integrated Jira and PagerDuty through Alertbirds. But again, it was really just a bunch of REST calls going back and forth and passing JSON payloads to the two different systems. I don't know of good documentation beyond that of where you would find it. But I know that it would be done, and it would be done through the REST APIs.
Okay, so next question is from Tanya. Can the Jira header/menu bar be locked at the top of the screen so it always appears when scrolling?
Oh, okay, so so you're hoping to have this bar right here stay at the top as opposed to, well, I can't scroll on this one because it's not long enough. Let me make my page longer. So if I scroll down, you notice that the bar disappears. So you'd be able to lock this to the top. There's not a way within Jira itself, within the Jira UI, in order to actually do that. But if you were to go and inspect this element, or if you had web developers on hand, you would find that this whole kind of header bar right here is probably just a div and a bunch of stuff that's inside of that div. But anyway, it's something that we could target with either JavaScript or CSS in order to actually implement that. So the way that you would actually do it would be through JavaScript. The way that you would want to present that JavaScript to Jira so that it actually gets executed. My recommendation is always to create an add-on and put your JavaScript into that add-on and install the add-on into Jira. You have a lot of control over the context that it's going to be shown in, exactly what's going to be happening. But the other really big advantage that you get of creating an add-on and installing that into Jira is that when you are no longer the sysadmin and somebody else comes along, they can go through all the custom add-ons they have installed and say, oh, we have the Precipio top bar pin add-on installed. I wonder what that is. And then find out, okay, well, it's just a little bit of JavaScript that just pins the bar to the top. The kind of a much more hackish way of doing it, or kludgy way, would be to take that JavaScript that you wrote to pin the bar to the top and put it into either the custom HTML in Confluence. Either the layouts within Jira or the banner within Jira, or you could put it, since if you only wanted it on the issue view for whatever reason, you could put it into either a custom field description or a field configuration description, because if you put any HTML or JavaScript into those field configuration description boxes, it'll get executed whenever that field configuration is active. But when you leave and some new sysadmin comes in and they say, oh, cool, yeah, the top bar doesn't move, they're just going to assume that that's the natural functionality of Jira. And then someday something is going to happen that's going to break that, and everyone's going to say, oh, the top bar isn't stuck there anymore. What's going on? They'll have no idea. And they'll have no way to figure out how to find that you stuck some custom JavaScript into some weird little place in Jira. So it can be a very effective way to customize Jira, and it's nice because you can just edit it within the application. It's stored in the database, so it'll persist through upgrades and all that great stuff. But new admins will have no idea that it's there or how to find it, and it causes problem after problem after problem. Client after client after client that we go into, weird behaviors come out of bits of JavaScript stuck into non-standard places. So really, if you can, wrap it up in an add-on and install it into Jira so everyone knows that it's there, and you have some sort of change management process you can put around changing that code. Flip side of that is you better have a good place to store the code so that people know where to find it and they can go change it. I recommend Stash.
Okay, so next question is from Larry. Can you speak about federated Jira instances, benefits and pitfalls, information resources, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. Atlassian actually has a good page on federation. See if we can find it. So if you go look at these, there's a couple of different ones, and then Jira at scale. So federating is it used to be a really popular thing to do. It's actually increasingly what we're seeing is that people want to move away from federation because of the headaches of it, because of the kind of disconnectivity between the separate instances of JIRA. The only places that we're really seeing people stick to federation are where they're in an industry that mandates it, or it's some other kind of, I don't want to say power struggle, but there are different groups within the organization that need to own different parts of the system for whatever reason. But usually it's a industry compliance thing. So we have highly sensitive information that is more sensitive than we want to take a chance with just using permissions within JIRA to hide that information. It actually, because of our industry, needs to be in a separate system. So they'll have two instances of JIRA, one for super secret data, one for less secret data that the rest of the company uses. In that case, what you're going to do is create application links between the two instances. Then you can do things like run reports from JIRA 1 in JIRA 2. So I can run a filter, get a result set, and display the results in the other instance of JIRA. The pitfall to that is that you can only get the results from one instance of JIRA at any given time. So a filter will only run against one instance of JIRA. You can't say, get all of the open bugs and have that get the bugs in JIRA 1 and the bugs in JIRA 2 and put them together into one list, or configure one gadget to look at all of that data. What you'd have to do as well to look at, say, a pie chart of the distribution of the signees of open issues from JIRA 1 and JIRA 2 is create a dashboard. You need to go into JIRA 1 and get the XML URL to the descriptor for the pie chart at a JIRA 1, and then create that as an external gadget in JIRA 2. So now you have two pie charts that you have to deal with, one from JIRA 1, one from JIRA 2, and it's actually kind of hard to tell which one is which. But somehow, once you figure it out, you need to add each of one of those to your dashboard, and then configure the one from JIRA 1 to go get all the open bugs, configure the one from JIRA 2 to go get all the open bugs out of JIRA 2, and then you have these two pie charts sitting next to each other, and you can look at the distribution across them. So you're getting the information. It's pretty difficult to aggregate it. You end up with a lot of duplication of filters, of gadgets. It's really not going to give you that kind of cohesive single reporting platform from multiple instances kind of experience that most people are really looking for from a federated instance of JIRA. There is a JIRA offline client. I forget the name of it now, but you'd find it really easily on the marketplace. But it will allow you to do that aggregation. So you could say issue type equals bug, and it will go out to all of the different JIRA instances that it's configured to know about and pull back all of that data. So you have to use an offline client to do it. It has its own nuances and its own kind of, I don't know, challenges. So it is also not really the silver bullet. And for all those reasons, that's really why people are starting to move back towards a single instance of JIRA. And we're doing a lot of these projects of merging JIRA instances together, especially now with Data Center. If the reason that you went to Federation was to scale, there's a much better solution for that now, and that's JIRA Data Center. If you need more capacity than you can throw a server at, then JIRA Data Center is going to allow you to have active-active clustering and have multiple nodes that are actually handling all of the scalability issues that you went to Federation for. If you're federated because of compliance issues, then you have to work with the limitations of Federation, and you still can get all that information, just not necessarily going to be as smooth as you might want it to be. There's a lot more to talk about around Federation, so if you have kind of specific questions, or if you really want to get way down in the weeds on specific things, please contact us.
Okay, great. So I have a little bit of clarification from Sanal on the question she asked earlier regarding the automatic.
It was regarding adding columns.
Yeah. So they said, I was asking about the test issue type, the columns down there where they write their test scripts.
Okay. I don't know if I have a good example of a test. I'm going to assume you're using Zephyr in this case. I'm pretty sure that Zephyr has that. These test details right here. I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to actually look that up if this is a configurable thing within Zephyr to see if you can add more columns to this. So give us one more chance to get back to you on that one.
Okay, and then one more question from Sanal. So is there no other option than to manually move the issue type from one to another?
Okay, so you wanted to automate the process of moving from one issue type to another issue type. Um, I don't believe that there's a standard out of the box way of doing that. Like there's not a post function that comes with Jira that would do that. A post function in that case would actually be the mechanism that you would most likely use. So if you wanted to go from if your process was vetting bugs, maybe you have a triage issue type, and you go through a couple of steps that validate, yes, this is a bug, or no, it's not. So if you have a button, a transition that says validate bug, that you want to move it to a bug issue type, then in that case, a post function would be the way to actually do that. I don't know of one offhand, but there's likely one on the marketplace somewhere that would do that. If not, it'd be a pretty simple post function to write and install into Jira. Another approach is you could use Bob Swift's Create on Transition add-on that allows you to create subtasks and issues on an issue transition. So in doing that, in validating that bug that came in, you'd be creating a new issue and linking it back to the original triage bug that came in. It's probably not going to be the smoothest implementation for what you want, because you probably want to take the original issue. But with Create on Transition, you can copy all of those original details from that triage issue type into the new bug issue that you created anyway. So you'd still be able to get all that information. Otherwise, we'd have to look for a post function, and there's a good chance there's one out there, and if not, it would be a simple thing to write.
Okay, great. So it looks like that is our last question. We'll go ahead and send out a link to this recording over the next couple of days. So just a reminder, our next webinar, SDLC Project Management with the Atlassian Toolset, is on January 7th at 11 a.m. Central. We thank you very much for attending and hope you have a great day. Take care.